obviously the big news over the weekend and the big news today is the situation in Syria. So over the last few days, the dictator of Syria used chemical weapons against his own citizens once again, and the footage broke on TV. Now, as you recall, the last time there was a public use of chemical weapons and the news broke on TV, President Trump lobbed a couple of missiles into Syria. Something like 50 missiles were lobbed into Syria, and a particular airbase was hit. Well, it's unclear what exactly the United States is going to do as of yet, but already action has been taken. It's been taken by Israel. So Israel went in and knocked out a Syrian airbase and took down some of their Syrian air defenses. And I'll give you all that information in just a second. For those who don't know what Syrian chemical weapons attacks look like, they are just horrendous and horrific. The footage looked something like this. So you can see these children are, being treated. They're being washed off with water because they've all been doused with chemical weapons. A lot of these folks have died of suffocation. Something like 100 people died of suffocation. These are children. These are small children. So obviously, when you see images like this, it's absolutely horrific. Israel lashed out yesterday. So here's the story from the Associated Press. Russia and the Syrian military have blamed Israel for a pre-dawn missile attack Monday on a Syrian airbase that reportedly killed 14 people, including 3 Iranians, while international condemnation grew over a suspected poison gas attack over the weekend that was said to be carried out by the Syrian government. Opposition activists said 40 people died in the chemical attack, blaming President Bashar Assad's forces. The UN Security Council planned to hold an emergency meeting Monday to discuss the chemical attack. Well, whoop-de-doo with the UN Security Council. Russia sits on the UN Security Council. Russia is the great sponsor state of the Syrian regime, so nothing is going to happen in the UN Security Council. We should pull all of our money from that awful institution. If you want to know how terrible the UN is, understand that Syria is about to sit on the Committee for the Regulation of Chemical and Biological Weapons. No, that is not a joke. That is a real, actual thing. So before you start thinking that the UN is going to step in and solve anything at all, recognize that the UN is a gigantic joke. And that is why it's up to sovereign states to do something about these sort of atrocities. The timing of the strike on the airbase in the central Homs province, hours after President Trump said there would be a big price to pay for the chemical weapons attack, raised questions about whether Israel was acting alone or as a proxy for the United States. Israel typically does not comment on its airstrikes in Syria. It was the second such attack this year on the airbase. The airbase is known as T4, and it's where Iranian fighters are believed to be stationed. According to Russia's defense ministry, 2 Israeli aircraft targeted the T4 airbase, firing 8 missiles. It said Syria shot down 5 of them. The other 3 landed in the western part of the base. Syrian state TV quoted an unnamed military official saying that Israeli F-15 warplanes fired several missiles at T4, and it gave no further details. And of course, Israel's foreign ministry said nothing. Since 2012, Israel has struck inside Syria more than 100 times, mostly targeting suspected weapons convoys destined for the Lebanese militant group Hezbollah, which has been fighting along Syrian governmental forces. So this looks like this could be the prelude to larger action. John McCain, and one of the people, Senator McCain, has been pushing for larger action in Syria for a long time. He's wanted to topple the Syrian regime for years and years, and he suggested that we arm Syrian rebels. One of the problems with that at the time is it wasn't clear who the Syrian rebels actually were. Were they all kind, gentle, nice people, or were some of them associated with terrorist groups the way that some of the people we armed in Libya were? That was unclear at the time. It led to a lot of Republican pushback. Here's what Senator McCain had to say. He said, President Trump last week signaled to the world that the United States would prematurely withdraw from Syria. We didn't have a chance to talk about this last week, but Trump did say he wanted to withdraw from Syria, and immediately, within days, Bashar Assad was using chemical weapons on his own citizens. That's why President Trump's rhetoric actually matters, and to pretend otherwise is foolish. McCain continues, Bashar Assad and his Russian and Iranian backers have heard him, and emboldened by American inaction, Assad has reportedly launched another chemical attack against innocent men, women, and children, this time in Douma. Initial accounts show dozens of innocent civilians, including children, have been targeted by this vicious bombardment designed to burn and choke the human body and leave victims writhing in unspeakable pain. Crimes against humanity have become Assad's trademarks in his relentless campaign against the people of Syria that has killed more than 500,000 people and forced 11 million people from their homes, according to John McCain. President Trump was quick to call out Assad today, along with the Russian and Iranian governments on Twitter. The question now is whether he will do anything about it. The president responded decisively when Assad used chemical weapons last year. He should do so again and demonstrate that Assad will pay a price for his war crimes. To be sure, President Trump inherited bad options after years of inactions by his predecessor in Syria. History will render a bitter judgment on America for that failure, but no one should believe that we are out of options. We can and should change course, starting with a comprehensive strategy that lays out clear objectives for our mission there. Well, that is the big question, is what are the objectives going to be for the mission there? because foreign policy isolationists, people like Ann Coulter or Rand Paul, they would say we have no interest in Syria whatsoever. So terrible things are happening there, awful humanitarian crisis, but humanitarian crises are happening all over the world. It is not the job of the United States to stop every humanitarian crisis. It all depends on the sort of blood and treasure America will have to expend in order to stop those humanitarian crises. Well, that's obviously true. We have to calculate each individual situation on its own. But the situation on Syria has fundamentally changed in the several years since President Obama allowed Bashar Assad to get away with his chemical weapons attack. Here's what President Trump tweeted after the chemical weapons attack. He tweeted, quote, "Many dead, including women and children, in mindless chemical attack in Syria. Area of atrocity is in lockdown and encircled by Syrian army, making it completely inaccessible to outside world. President Putin, Russia, and Iran are responsible for backing Animal Assad." So he's now gotten a nickname for Assad, which is entirely appropriate in this case. Big price, and continued big price to pay. Open area immediately for medical help and verification. Another humanitarian disaster for no reason whatsoever. Sick. Okay, all of that is true. The question becomes, okay, what is going to happen next? Well, Trump's national security advisor, his security advisor, rather, Tom Bossert, he was on national TV on Sunday, and he said, listen, all the options are on the table here.
This is one of those issues on which every nation, all peoples have all agreed and have agreed since World War II is an unacceptable practice. So
is it possible there will be another missile attack?
Yeah, I wouldn't take anything off the table. These are horrible photos. We're looking into the attack at this point. The State Department put out a statement last night, and the president's senior national security cabinet have been talking with him and with each other all throughout the evening and this morning, and myself included.
So one of the things that's amazing about all of this is that people on the left are already critical of Trump. Trump inherited an awful situation here. Tommy Vietor, who is just a dolt. He used to drive a van for Obama and then suddenly ended up as a national security counselor for President Obama after driving a van. And now I guess that he is doing Pod Save America type stuff. Well, he tweeted out that President Trump inherited a bad situation. Well, Tommy, who did he inherit that from? Weren't you there? I mean, all of you were there at the time. Now, there were those of us who opposed President Obama's quote-unquote pinprick strike in Syria. The reason being that if you send a missile into Syria and then you do nothing else, you actually embolden the Iranians and you embolden the Syrians and you embolden the Russians. Nobody expected that President Obama was going to give away the store to the Russians. If you recall back to 2013, Bashar Assad used chemical weapons. Barack Obama then drew a red line in the sand. Here is President Obama back then drawing a red line.
We have been very clear to the Assad regime, but also to other players on the ground that a red line for us is we start seeing a whole bunch of chemical weapons moving around or being utilized. That would change my calculus. That would change my equation.
Okay, so he made that statement actually in August of 2012, and then, of course, Bashar Assad immediately used chemical weapons, like within a couple of months. And then Barack Obama did something really unexpected. First, he said, maybe I'll throw a missile in there. But you know what? I need congressional approval. Now, that was obviously a lie because he didn't have congressional approval for his Libya action. He just went ahead and did it. But he said, I'll throw it to Congress, and that went nowhere. And then he said, you know what? I'll let the Russians take over. The Russians can come in and they will disarm the Syrians. So Barack Obama and Susan Rice both came out. Susan Rice, then the national security advisor, she came out and she said, don't worry. Syria's chemical weapons have been removed. They're gone. Syria has no more chemical weapons, right? Obama was triumphalist about this. He said, everything is better. There will be no more chemical weapons attacks. Everything is under control. Here is Barack Obama and Susan Rice. This is back in 2013.
Think about what we've done these last 8 years without firing a shot. We've eliminated Syria's declared chemical weapons program. All of these steps have helped keep us safe and helped keep our troops safe. Those are the result of diplomacy. We don't have strong efforts there, the more you will be called upon to clean up after the failure of diplomacy.
We were able to find a solution that actually removed the chemical weapons that were known from Syria in a way that the use of force would never have accomplished.
Okay, and Tommy Vietor said the same thing. Well, you know, we got rid of a lot of the chemical weapons, right, except for the ones that he's using on the civilians and has continued to use on the civilians. So well done, Susan Rice. It is amazing. All of these people who came into the Obama administration proclaiming that it was a new day for American foreign policy and they're going to act in the humanitarian interest of the people of Syria, and then proceeded to allow that entire country to descend into utter and absolute chaos. Now, there's a civil war going on, and that wasn't Barack Obama's fault. It was Barack Obama's fault that he decided to hand over all of these security concerns to the Russians. Okay, the Russians obviously had nefarious purposes there. All they care about is propping up Bashar Assad. And all of this raises the question, which is, okay, what should the United States do now? And that is a serious and open question. You know, it is amazing, again, how badly the Obama administration blew it. This is not on President Trump, but now Trump is the president, so that raises a question as to where we go from here. In a second, I'm going to answer that question for you, or at least give you maybe some concerns that I have about full-scale military intervention, as well as some possibilities on what we can do in Syria right now. First, I want to say thanks to our sponsors over at Stamps.